Welcome, everybody. Thanks. I know some people are still taking a seat, but we're going to get started right on time here. My name is Corinne. I'm on the product marketing team for Jira, and have had the privilege of working with Shane and Jane from Akamai over the last couple of months on this presentation. So really excited to see it come to life today. But before we kick things off with them, just wanted to share a couple things about our presenters that you may not know. In fact, if you did know these, I'd be blown away. Shane owns a man clip, but strictly uses it in work environments only. Man bun clip, yep. He has played in the snow in 100-degree heat, and he's allergic to poultry. So apparently those are all true. And then Jane used to be obsessed with the show Xena Warrior Princess. She made multiple costumes and chakrams over the decades. And even before she met her future husband, she was determined to go to New Zealand, where the show was filmed. And sure enough, she met her husband and went on her honeymoon to New Zealand. So happily ever after. Okay, with that, I will let Jane and Shane take it away.
Thank you, Corinne. All right, little audience participation to start off. Just shout out, quick answers. Who knows the primary reason that the internet was invented? Come on. No. I knew someone was going to say that. No. Can't hear you. Come on. Academics. All this is totally wrong. The purpose of the internet is the creation, the distribution, and the storage of feline-related content. The reason we know that is because we work there. I mean, at the internet.
Well, to be more precise, we work at Akamai, where we make the internet, including cat videos, more reliable, safer, and more secure. And at Akamai, I'm a director of engineering, and I manage our build ecosystem, and that is the team that makes our build and release tooling for the other engineers at Akamai to release our product.
And I'm a program manager. I've supported Jane's team and other teams in driving strategy and just generally helping get things done. And at Akamai, yes, we do manage like getting your cat videos properly and securely sent to your grandmother, but we also deal with cats in another way, and that's, we feel like we herd cats with the engineers. Now, there may be engineers here, and I'm not trying to disparage you or our engineering coworkers. What I mean by that is, okay, Akamai is a 20-year-old company, which makes it really old for a tech company, but it's also, it has maintained this kind of startup mentality where everybody's, you know, creative and able to come up with cool solutions and go do them, and everybody thinks in their own way, and everybody's super smart, and it's a fun place to work. But the problem when you get that many smart people in a room is they all are absolutely convinced they have the right way to work. And so what you have is a lot of different people with their own ideas of how to do things, and when you want to come in and try to manage a project of any size, it's a problem. So small projects that are easy, that, you know, might only need a few different people working on it, that can work if you're managing the cats. But when you have a large program, you have problems. And Jane and I found ourselves managing a program very much like that not too long ago called Hyperdrive.
In this program, there was a lot of senior leadership and executive attention, and they wanted us to tell them what they were going to get from this program, like far out into the future, because they wanted to know how to invest. And we had a lot of different teams working on it, and those teams all tracked their work in different ways. Some of them were not using Jira, some were using Jira, and the engineering managers of those teams felt very strongly about how they were tracking their work. And they did not want to try to do stuff the same as everybody else. Coming back to Shane talking about our startup mentality. And this program, there's a lot of dependencies between these teams. Shane and I were responsible for the success of the program, even though we didn't actually have very much direct management responsibility for most of the teams on the program. And this is the situation that we found ourselves when we were working on this program.
So what I want to try to show up here is the idea of a waterfall versus an agile mentality. And I'm using these as kind of bookends, kind of ideas. I'm not strictly trying to pigeonhole something into waterfall or agile. So understand, I'm just using these as rough estimations. But we have management kind of has waterfallish expectations when they look at work. They want to know what's your long-term strategy, what's the budget. Those things won't change, right? What am I going to be getting over several periods of time? What's your release cadence? Those kind of things. We had teams, though, that had an agile way of working. Some teams worked in agile ways. Some teams worked in more waterfall ways. And so this kind of created a little bit of a discrepancy between what the teams were able to produce and what management expected in terms of reporting. So we found out that this could kind of cause us a lot of problems. We thought, well, Jira, that'll fix all our stuff, because the great thing about Jira is that it's super flexible. It allows you to do anything you want. The bad part about Jira is that it's super flexible. It allows you to do anything you want. And we found out that if you have a bad process, laying Jira on top of it doesn't make it better.
So we were spending a lot of time trying to get status. So we were asking the engineering teams, like, give us your status. Like, management wants to know what's going on. Management was constantly asking us, like, what's happening? Is this program going well? And we were getting really frustrated. The engineering teams were frustrated because they felt like we were coming to them often and interrupting them and asking for status. The management team was frustrated because they couldn't get status when they wanted it, and even what they would get from us wasn't necessarily what they wanted. Most of all, we were frustrated because we were spending a lot of time trying to do stuff, and nobody was really that happy with it. So we were a year into this program where we were trying to get this statusing, and we looked at each other and said, what are we going to do about this problem? And that's actually what we're going to tell you, what we did about it. So what problem-solving methodology we used to try to solve this problem, and then how we used Jira and Structure primarily to solve that problem, and that's what we're going to talk you through in the rest of the slides. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the problem definition, the approach that we followed, the solution we came up with, and then Shane's going to show some examples of how we used it in Jira, what we learned, and what we're planning to do next with how far along with that we are. So now a bit of a kind of recap of what I talked about earlier. This was a large, multi-year, cross-functional program. And the management was looking for 1 to 2, even 3-year forecasts about what we were going to do in this program, because they wanted to make sure that, one, that they were investing in something that was going to pay off, that we had the right resources, both in terms of budget and in terms of people, and they wanted to know what they were going to get out of this work. We had a whole bunch of different teams, almost 40 to 50 people across 8 to 10 teams, and they're all tracking their work differently, so it's very hard to find out what was going on. And not only did management want these long forecasts, they also wanted to know how it was going. They wanted to know, was their investment paying off? And we were spending a lot of time trying to do statusing, and what we were doing was it was very manual. It was soon out of date as soon as we did it. It was also really time consuming. And what we wanted was something that was automated, that was always up to date, and that was fast. It was easy to do. So in order to try to solve this problem, we used a collaborative problem-solving methodology. And this was inspired by Kaizen events. I had happened to be a part of several Kaizen events. Kaizen is a Japanese word that can be loosely translated into continuous improvement. And a Kaizen event is an event of short duration in which you get a group of people in the room and you try to solve the problem right there in that time frame or whatever you have decided. So you walk into the room with a problem and you walk out of it with a solution that you can implement. And part of what's important about that is that you have the right people in the room. It's usually the people who are experiencing the pains as well as the people who are actually responsible for doing the implementation. So in the case of what we did, those were the engineering leaders and the program managers. The time frame we picked for this was only 3 hours. We wanted to see what we could do quickly to solve this problem. And during this 3 hours, we did several brainstorms, so collaborative problem solving. We did a brainstorm about what we wanted to fix, what our pains were, what our requirements going to be, and our possible solutions. And we also did give them lunch. I forgot to call that out on the other side. It was over lunchtime, this talk. So what I'm going to show you now is what were some of the pains that we identified from our brainstorming sessions. So we did our brainstorming. We broke up into 3 teams, and each team brainstormed for 20 minutes about either the pain, the requirement, or the solution. Then we got back together to share and prioritize which things we were going to attack. So our initial brainstorm about the pains was really open-ended. Like we could brainstorm whatever pains we were having with a solution. And based on what we prioritized, that would drive the rest of the workshop in terms of what we actually chose to fix. So what was our pains? Well, there's one about prioritization. For the engineering teams, they didn't actually know what was coming next. They didn't have a good backlog. They also weren't sure about the uncertainty. So when you're an Agile team and how those teams were working, they were just always working on one thing, and maybe they knew what was the next thing, but they didn't know further along. So when they're trying to give these like 1 to 2, 3-year forecasts out to management, that was really challenging for them. There's another pain about expectation, particularly around the level of granularity. So a lot of the engineering teams, they actually all had a different level of granularity, even in how they did their own work. But that granularity for how they were managing an engineering team and their software was very different than the level of granularity that the engineering managers and the senior leadership wanted to see. We also had pains around grooming. So when we were trying to, it goes back to kind of the backlog as well, when we were trying to say what was coming next and how long is that going to take, those engineering teams hadn't spent the time to figure that out. And one realization, even though in some ways should be obvious, was that grooming actually takes time and effort. And if you really want people to do that and to be able to forecast, you actually have to give them that time and allow them to spend time on grooming. We also had a problem with dependencies. So when we did this event, all of the teams were grooming independently, even if they had dependencies amongst each other. So we wouldn't necessarily discover that there was a problem or an issue or somebody was waiting on someone else until much further along in the implementation process. So those were our pains. Based on that, we got to requirements, and then we brainstormed on solutions. And we identified a solution in the event that I will tell you about next. Then we refined it, and we also had commitment from everybody in terms of what they were going to do for that solution. Now, we only gave ourselves 3 hours, which means we couldn't do anything that complicated. So we had some simple criteria. One is that we wanted to use Jira out of the box. We didn't want to be making anything custom. And if we were going to be using any plugins, we wanted to only use ones that we already had in-house. We wanted it to be easy, so we wanted something that it would be easy for everybody to do. And those were our kind of main criteria for what we were going to do. So now, what did our solution look like? Well, first, we started with what common set of data we needed for the statusing. This would be the statusing that we wanted to show up to senior leadership. And it was very simple. There was only 4 items. The description of the item, who owned it, when it was going to be released or delivered, and we did that just in terms of months, and what status. And it was just open, in progress, or closed. We also agreed that that item we were going to talk about is something that's user-facing. So when we talked about our users, this was internal, so our users were our internal other kind of developers and engineers at the company. So it was like, what are they going to get when that deliverable is done? We agreed on a cadence of when we were going to update, and we had 2 cadences. One was like what we call the quarterly planning session. So we all committed to spend 2 hours a quarter together grooming what was going to come in the next 6 to 9 months. And these were very high-level grooming, but all the teams were together. And that meant if you were dependent upon another team, you could just ask them, like, hey, we're going to need this from you. Is this okay with you? And they can go back and forth. So instead of trying to figure stuff out after the fact or through email, we just resolved it in that short 2-hour grooming sessions. We also agreed on a cadence for when we were going to update these deliverables, and that was once a month. So we all committed that once a month, at the end of the month, we will update whatever deliverables we said we were going to do in that month. And the last thing, which I've kind of been talking about, is we were accountable to each other. When we did the pains and the brainstorm, it's not that the engineering leaders didn't think that status was important. It was just hard for them to relate the status that we were asking for, what they were doing every day. And what they also didn't like is that we were interrupting them constantly to ask for status. So with this process, we were giving them a cadence of when we expected that status from them, and also define the granularity and the forecasting that we were expecting. So kind of in essence, we built a bridge with a Jira project in between what the teams were doing and what management was expecting. And we used the initiative, issue type, epics, and stories. These are not necessarily traditional usage of an Agile case, but initiative, that would be essentially a team. Like my team was the build team, so our initiative was called build. An epic was at the feature level. One example of a feature that we delivered was incremental builds. And then the stories were what was going to be delivered that month. So at a very high level, so management could see examples for build would be, we've reviewed the design, we're doing a beta, we're at a general availability. Those are the examples of the kind of monthly deliverables that we did. So very far rolled up, and which are much different than the level of granularity that I was using to manage my team. So now Shane is going to talk about some more details about how we were using Jira.
So echoing what Jane said, for you Agile purists out there, this is not Agile, in case you haven't caught that. This is a bridge between the world we were in with a mix of a lot of different methodologies and trying to get us where we wanted to be, which was a more Agile-ish world, but change management does not mean you just slap everything in immediately and the world is now a pretty place. It means you have to take incremental steps to get there. So everything we're talking about is one big incremental step. We don't have an end to the story. We're talking about where the process is and where we got to it. So like Jane said, we talked about having initiatives at the team level, and this kind of reflects how the teams were already used to working. We had teams that were somewhat siloed, and this process broke down a lot of those silos, but they still had their own management structures they were working in. So to make their work easier to find, we put those at an initiative level. For the epics, that's about 3 to 6 months of work. That was rolled up, and so each team would own the epics, which were the big chunks of work that they were trying to accomplish. And then the stories, and again, these are not proper, real stories in an Agile sense, but from a customer standpoint, what am I getting during this month? And that would be defined under the epics at the story level. So the way that looked, we used, if you've not seen this view before, I give a shout out to the Almworks guys. They've got a booth out there. It allows you to take Jira and be able to display it in a hierarchical view like this. So we took this and we kept, like I said, we kept the same hierarchy the teams had. This shows a couple of our team tracks at the initiative level in the yellow-orange issues up there. Then under that we have the epics, and then under there the stories. And that just allowed people to find their work. And then we also defined the releases there using the fixed version field in Jira. Now again, this is kind of a hack a little bit, not properly using how a release works, but again, compared to how we had been working without any release, this is a step in the right direction. You're thinking about where we're going to be going. Also, there were a lot of dependent releases underneath all of this, but again, we're not trying to show the detail, we're trying to show it at a high executive level. So we would have, in the fixed version field, they would go in, define these, said, yes, I think I'll be able to do this in this month. And something that we had to get our teams over the idea of, they were uncomfortable committing publicly to an executive level on these dates. And we found that was kind of a thing that people were having trouble with because they thought, well, this is going to turn into a gotcha exercise, that management's going to come along and say, well, you said you would have it done at this time, but you didn't have it done at this time. And in a true Agile sense, we're trying to show them, look, this is not a gotcha exercise. We're all smart people here. We're all responsible. Things slip for good reasons, and when it does, the big implication you're going to have is to go in, select the drop-down, and pick the next month for your release. That's all it is. And what that creates is transparency. Any dependent teams that need that work now know, hey, this thing's going to slip. And it's just a way for everyone to see that that's there. And once they saw that there's a comfort level and they don't have to worry this is not a gotcha exercise, it's just about communication and transparency, they were a lot more comfortable with that. So that's how it looked in the planning. Now I want to shift to how it's looked in practice. So Jane talked about 2 different cadences. We had the monthly deliverables, which were updated, believe it or not, monthly. And then we had the quarterly planning sessions. So how did that work? So initially we got people, they had to get used to an iterative approach when some teams were not comfortable thinking far out, and it's like, all right, this is about expectations. Something 6 months down the road is clearly not going to be as well defined as something that's a month from now or next week. And we understand that. And as we move forward and in the plan, those far out future dates will become a little more clear. And we just set the expectation in the group. That's how it's going to work, and that's okay. Also, having everyone sit in a room for these planning sessions was really helpful because there was a lot of cross-dependency between teams. And, well, oh, wait, I don't need to set up a meeting. I don't need to send an email because the guy I need to talk to is right over there. Get up, go talk to them, figure out how that's going to work. You negotiate a date, and all that could be settled. There could be future discussions after that, but the main work and the main coordination all happened during this Kaizen event. The deliverable updates, people didn't like, I think for reasons I just explained, necessarily like now that we're kind of working more collaboratively with more transparency. It's like, wait a minute, I have these outside schedules imposed upon me. But they adapted to that pretty quickly when they understood that it's not a gotcha event, it's about communication, and people just want to know what's happening. They found that the regular planning cycles were something they could adapt to because we plan for those. This isn't extra work you have to do on top of your day job. This is part of your day job. From senior management, they were happy because they knew what was going on. They could see those deliverables. They would be able to know for users that were going to be using the features that we put out. They would know what we have done, what's coming. They would see if something slipped and be able to adjust their expectations accordingly. We also found that deliverable management became a little unwieldy, and we had to, that's just a maturing process of defining, all right, when I say something's going to be delivered, what really does what does an end user care about? Engineers, this is probably going to be a shock to you, they really like to talk about the nitty-gritty cool thing they did in the code. Well, those things won't necessarily be something that you would brag about to an end user. And that's kind of a hard thing to get people used to. So level setting across the board on what the proper granularity is. You know, we got better at it. For a while, you know, you don't want to be telling your executives about the 70 things you delivered this month if that's not actually true from a user standpoint. So we had to kind of adjust that as we went. So the takeaways we learned from this, the big lessons were that we needed to get the team buy-in. Having everyone sit in a room, having everyone agree was critical. Now, we could have, from a top-down perspective, it would have failed, but we could have tried, said, hey, guess what? You're going to hit these dates and you're going to do these things. Well, if people don't have input into what they're going to be producing and they don't help come up with those dates themselves, they're not going to be very receptive to impose dates, especially if your company is not very top-down, but it's very run from a grassroots perspective. It's like, all right, well, I don't have to listen to your dates. But when we all sit around and agree on what those dates should be, then people own those dates and they feel responsible for them. That same group mentality also helped when we talked about the monthly deliverables and agreeing on new behaviors and how that was going to work. Everybody in the same room, we're nodding, we know this is how it's going to work. Exceptions will be something we'll deal with, but having that buy-in from the entire team at the same time meant that it had some weight to it, because again, we didn't manage these people, not all of them, so we needed everyone to kind of agree that that's the way it was going to work. We were able to level set on deliverables. That's an ongoing process, as I talked about, figuring out what the granularity should be, but that's something, again, as the team worked together and did this planning together, they were able to see other groups' deliverables. We got to know each other's work and understand, kind of as a common group mentality, what those should be. And the last point is the most important thing. This is not a technological solution, really. Yes, we did this in Jira, and yes, it's about software development, but this is really a people problem that we were solving. It's about getting group consensus, about getting buy-in, and about understanding the path that people have to take to get them from the state that they're in to the state that they need to be, and sometimes that's slow. But slow is okay if we can go at measured rates that people agree with, and then you start to get good results that way. So here's the epilogue of the story. When we started this project, the team was already working for a while, about a year when we got this going, and so we had a lot of backlog in Jira, a lot of other things. So we kind of came into this with a mess that we then had to clean up. We had someone else, another team, join our team to add to some of the work we were doing. And they didn't have this background in Jira, they weren't planning their work there. And so the manager of that team looked at me and said, well, why would I track things in multiple places? That's kind of painful. Why can't I just plan all my work and show everything, even to the subtask level, with what you're doing? And I had a little tear form in my eye, and I felt a flutter in my heart, and it's like, that's where we need to be. And that's exactly how I planned it from the very beginning. No. Not really. But he had found, hey, your process is great, but it's sort of painful, and it is. This is not perfect. It's a bridge to get somewhere, and it's not always the greatest way to do it, but it's moving us in that direction. But he was kind of showing what the next step should be. You don't need multiple reporting things. That's really not the best way to work. And as we move forward to get us out of this old way of working, dissolving that layer where everything can be more integrated and not having to do any kind of double reporting is really the direction we want to go. And we started to see that there's complications there. If we'd done that with a team that had a lot of the Jira backlog, that would not have been as easy to do. But we see where this can evolve and go in the future. And I think the best way to summarize is to show you a photo of a cat.
Okay, thanks, Shane. But in real summary, what we hope that you can take away from this is the problem-solving methodology that we use to try to get everyone together to agree upon what they were willing to commit to get that buy-in from them is something that you might be able to take away, as well as this Jira bridge that we made to try to match between the Agile teams and the more waterfall management. And I was the eng lead of the program, but I also managed 2 of the teams in the program, and we were one of the teams that had a huge backlog. This wasn't our only program. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of projects and tickets in Jira already, and I wanted to still maintain that independence of having a project per code line that I could independently version as those apps were released, while still doing this roll-up status that was required for management. So I do have some redundancy, but right now that's well worth it to me to not have to change all of the existing backlog I have. But one of the biggest wins from this was the quarterly planning of doing that together as a team, and that really helped, one, give us time to think about the future, but also to identify those cross-dependencies. So that is our talk, and we're open for questions.